So before we start, I would like to give you a short intro to Adrián and Meyken practice, and then they will start the conversation. Adrián Fernández studied visual arts at the San Alejandro Fine Arts Academy in 2004 and at the Superior Institute of Arts in 2010 in Havana, Cuba. He works as an independent artist, as a professor of documentary photography for New York University Tisch School of the Arts, Office of Special Programs Abroad. Early in his career, he began to experiment with photographic media, in which he has developed much of his art, expanding his practice in recent years to three-dimensional installation and sculpture works. The metal structures found in his sculptures result from the combination of simple geometric figures that are interconnected, giving shape to more complex volumes, which sometimes appear to be unfinished or abandoned constructions in the process of creation. His photography has developed from black and white with a documentary perspective to studio photography and the use of digital images with computer-generated content. His work is inspired by the symbolic connection established between objects, belongings, architectural forms, images, or fragments of the material world that inhabit and at the same time modulate people's daily lives. He explores their impact on the shaping of personal memory, collective history, and the creation of new cultural paradigms in contemporary society. Adrián Fernández has exhibited in group and solo shows in Cuba, United States, Mexico, Panama, France, Germany, Norway, Belgium, and Switzerland. His work can be found in the collection of the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, 20C Museum Hotels, Perez Art Museum, Miami, Jordan Schinzer Museum of Art, and Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes, La Habana. And a short bio to Meyken Barreto. Meyken is now currently an adjunct lecturer at City College of New York. She is also a curator and art writer. Meyken has served as regional director at Artist Pension Trust, gallery manager at Y Gallery in New York, and a studio manager at Los Carpinteros Studio in Madrid and Havana. She has taught art history at Havana University and San Jeronimo College in Havana. She has lectured in international institutions such as Universidad Complutense in Madrid and Martin Luther University in Halle. In 2018, she was curator in residence at Residency Unlimited, and in 2009, she won Cuba's National Curatorship Award. So I will let them to start the conversation. Just to let you know, if you have any question, we appreciate if you just drop it in the chat, and we will go to your questions after the conversation or in the middle of conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Adrián. Thank you, Meyken.
Thanks for the introduction, Mariam. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you, Marian, and good afternoon, everyone. For me, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon in conversation with Adrián. Maybe if you have joined previous conversations with Cuban artists, you already know me because I have been conducting these conversations since last year. And but I'm very happy that I'm able to talk to Adrián today, because as I knew his work, but we weren't able to actually meet and talk about his practice before this moment in which he's in residency at RU. So I'm very happy to have this talk with him this afternoon and try to unpack a little bit the meanings, the concepts, the ideas behind Adrián's practice, which is a multi-layered practice in which we'll find a lot of different elements that Adrián will tell us today, this afternoon. So Adrián, it's in this artist, he's an artist in residency during this period, and he has just an open studio on May 7th on the studio in Manhattan, and he's showing a couple of series of works there. And I would like to start talking about one of these series, the series of photos The title of this series is Pending Memories, and this is one of the things that it kept on my mind. I kept on my mind when I first talked to Adrian about his practice with in a studio visit that I made with him in Manhattan. Because this title, it's already introducing a sort of dislocation, temporal dislocation, pending memories. Memories is something from the past, that the idea of something that it's pending, it's in a way addressing the future somehow. So while Adrian was talking to me and I learned a little bit more about the process and about the meaning of these works, this sort of dislocation, it turns into a key element to understand his practice and understand what's behind these images that we see in this series. So I want to actually start with this series of works. I want to talk with Adrian about the processes, the concept behind this series. So I would like to ask him how something that just born is already a ruin, how you managed to put that into your work with this series of the pending memories.
Hey, Meyken, thank you very much. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here and finally being a residency at Residency Unlimited and being here having this discussion with you. The first conversation we were having was about 2 years ago when we first exchanged emails, and then I was supposed to come, but obviously the pandemic happened afterwards, so we're finally here. I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen so the rest can see some of the work. Okay, can you see?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So Pending Memory Series, it's a project that started in 2017. And I guess it resumes many references that I personally have within the art world, within the photography history, but it is also a work that it's inspired by my very early photograph that I took while I was barely commencing to study in the Art Academy in the year 2000. And in a process that I was saving those films, rescanning them, I met up again with images that I haven't seen in the last 18 years, which inspired this. And at some point, I'll get back to those images. Here, what we see in Pending Memory Series, we find these landscapes. We don't really know where some of them are located. Perhaps for some locals, Cubans in particular, might recognize one place or two, but normally the kind of space that I photographed doesn't pinpoint an exact location. It can either be a urban or a country landscape, where we are constantly meeting these massive structures, not fully understanding its purpose from the position we are looking at them, which is constantly from behind. Perhaps it might resemble as being behind a massive billboard or some sort of theatric stage. I guess all of those associations are there. But these images enhance the attention towards the structure that makes the existence of this construct possible. It enhances the attention towards the engineering part. Therefore, we're constantly failing to see what's on the other side. What's that possible message? What was the purpose of it? What drove the people who build this, you know, and what's that message, you know, on the other side? I'm constantly driven by that question, and that's really never provided either for the audience. I guess this work gives more questions than it provides answer. So I'm very much aware of the visuality, the aesthetic that has affected, that has influenced Cuban society throughout the years under the Revolution project. I guess that I inherit some of that visuality. The big architecture projects for the schools on the countryside, the new urbanization for in certain parts of the city for the people, you know, all of these were projects that impulsed the program of the Cuban Revolution. But now at some point, looking at them, and perhaps this is where the structure acquires a more symbolic meaning for me. I'm trying to understand, looking at the past, why were these things done? I can understand some of it, but yet I often find myself in a relation as pretty much the viewer looking at this photograph, trying to figure out what it is, what was the reason behind the existence of this structure, but not really fully understanding its purpose from where I'm standing right now. And perhaps this is also where the work, it's grounded immediately or inspired initially in the perception of the Cuban society project nowadays. But other than that, from that point on, it expands. And I believe it achieves a wider dialogue with a wider audience, which is why in a way I enjoy this series as well, you know. You can interrupt me if I'm losing myself, Meyken, because sometimes I can start talking about the project and I can, you know, I might get lost there.
No, go ahead.
But that's how it evolves. You know, it was a slow process that evolved within 3 years, and perhaps now I'm jumping to a, well, you were asking something about the title and this relation between past and future that can be perceived in the title, and there's an ambiguity there that I guess it conveys in a way my perception of Cuba, of the current state of Cuban society, where most of the project of the social project, it's with its many flaws, has failed. But it's some sort of a construct that is still somehow is still on. So I guess at a very initial stage, this structure can address that. Other than that, symbolically for me, they represent paradigms. You know, things that are erected in certain moments in history in representation of certain values, of certain beliefs. How well they sustain the passage of time, it is probably the reason why in this photograph they appear in the way they are, now being crumbling apart, that you obviously can perceive the passage of time. You know, there are missing parts, collapsing parts, but it still is there, you know.
Yeah, I see that there are like many different steps in the process of this series. So you have to choose this location, like this real location, and take the photo of the real location, and then work on somehow you work on the history of these structures. because you build them, okay, together with the team that you're working with, you build them, and then in a way you destroy it a little bit, so it shows that aspect of ruin of something that it's from the past. So there are like layers of that history, of that there's a temporality there from the beginning to this moment, that like this sort of getting this dystopian sort of image of these fictional structures. And that made me think a lot about this this genre of literature that it's known as historiographic metafiction, that deals with history, deals with fiction, and it, in a way, it connects a little bit with this series and that idea of creating the ruin, of just something that it's already in this space of uncertainty and unfinished. And of course, that idea of uncertainty is reinforced by the fact that we're always seeing the images or the structures from the back of them. We never know what's the actual message.
Exactly.
On it.
Yes, I guess this definitely what I was leaning towards while selecting the context that I was going to photograph, the landscapes that then shortly afterwards, and I guess we can connect now to talk a little bit about the process. There was a point that I was very clear into the idea that I did not want for them to be recognizable as part of the existing reality. This, for me, it starts to become a parallel reality that the viewer the viewer now is some sort of a scout or archaeologist that is walking and recognizing the landscape and meeting constantly these remnants, these constructions in the middle of nowhere, absolutely forgotten. I often think of myself in that same position, and trying to make sense of this of these things that they are finding in front of their eyes. But I was very much aware about the quality of that context that I wanted, and every trace of recognizable elements that even for locals in Cuba or in general, I absolutely moved away from those ideas. The final process, it involves many stages. These images that you're seeing here, it's the result of actual documentary photography with computer-generated content. So the main construct that we see here, it is something that it's artificially created and installed in the photograph. It doesn't exist. But the photograph tries to build on that imaginary reality. Every effort that I take, it's on the line of deceiving the audience as much and as best as I can, in order to believe, in order to perceive this as real. So the original structure begins as a drawing, as just simple silhouette-like drawings that afterwards, collaborating and in dialogue with an architect and an engineer, from there on, we start developing a whole project, as thinking of it as if it was actually possible to build. That's kind of an absurd and a very long curve of work. But approaching the conception of an image this way, it gives you an unprecedented level of details. At the end of the day, once it is rendered and once it's adapted to the context that it's going to be virtually installed. There usually takes about a month every image of production, in periods of a couple of weeks, talking about the technical parts of the project, back and forth, the type of structure that we're going to use, which, if it's concrete, if it's still, the type of grid and the type of visuality you can have. Sorry. And then the blueprints come out, and it's brand new. we have a new architectural project that you can see in 3 dimensions. Now, from there on, comes in the designer, which adapts every element present in that project to the material that we're going to use and to the context, to the time of day, the texture of the material. And on top of that, we start adding the elements that can project the idea of time. Let's think like this structure we're looking at right now. It has stand there for 60 years. How has affected this structure the last 60 years? If it could be a place that it's sandy, perhaps it's a coastal landscape. So if it's a coastal and it's water and salt in it, how is it going to affect over the period of 60 years? How is it going to erode the steel and so on? So you start from that point on, you start breaking it. And that's when the interesting part comes in the whole production, because now you're adding just very subtle twists and elements, and you're basically degrading the image in order to become more visually convincing. There are other elements in the making of these images, which I guess round up the whole visual experience, which is the use of black and white, the use of a square format, which perhaps it's associated with medium format photography, documentary photography. Mm-hmm. There's this fragment here actually comes in handy right now, because now you can see the texture that it has. So the texture, the grainy texture, as if it was film. There are many effects applied here that manipulate the way we are perceiving these images, and ultimately blend that it is born in the computer and that it is straight from the camera, which is documentary photography. All of that helps me to round up the work as you're seeing it right now.
So it's a very meticulous process, because this is a structure that it has all the details or the elements that a real architectural structure should have in order to be there, like for real. And then you start removing elements and you start working on it and treating it as a ruin, like turning it into that ruin.
Yeah, I guess one of the parts that I enjoy the most, it's that insane attention to detail, that extensive technical work to finish in an image that it's absolutely subjective in a way. All of this technicality behind the photograph, it's in the direction of building a symbolic message. So that's when all of it for me makes sense. It's just not the technical challenge. It's not the 3D rendering. It's like those are tools, or those are tools that you can use in many different ways nowadays. But I guess all of it makes sense when you're building a symbolic and a conceptual body of work to dialogue with the audience.
Yes, and there's this interest in having the audience kind of see this as a real thing, like all these many of these effects or many of these processes of your work are in the direction of creating an image that it's, when we see it, we immediately feel like this is something real. Yeah, and there's a question that I want to bring into the conversation right now, because it's asking if these structures or these series have a relationship to Tatlin's failed tower. And maybe you can talk a little bit about your influences or your inspiration for this series.
very much battling among the first ones, not only being I guess Russian constructivism in general, battling the photograph of Rodchenko as well, De Chirico's work as well, in painting, some of the sculpture work of Boscioni, or Umberto Boscioni's, from Italian Futurism. A heavy influence from Bernd Hillebecker from the School of Photography, from the Düsseldorf School of Photography. I guess these are all very strong influences that I've had throughout my career, and even from a personal aesthetic point of view. However, these things always, are orbiting my mind. And I guess one of the things that I enjoy about this work is how it's able to land those influences and yet create or being able to create a new proposal from where to start a conversation, right? Perhaps this is a good point to go here and show, where am I here? Okay. Among other influences, this was probably among the most intimate influences that this work had. And these were,
yeah, I was going to ask you about these early works of yours and how it connects somehow with the series.
These are literally among my first photographs. We are talking of works now probably 19, 20 years ago. And back at that moment, there was no other argument other than going out and just practice with my film camera, my 35 exposure RAW, which back in those days, 36 exposure were all the photography in the world. And being in Cuba, that had double the importance, because putting your hands in a roll of film, that was a very exotic thing to have as a very young artist student. So, but I guess that I was kind of, I do remember being aware of how I wanted to photograph things. I had perhaps a keen eye towards isolating these elements from their surroundings, enhancing composition, enhancing certain sense of visual abstraction in this structure that I was photographing. And then perhaps leaning towards the architecture and the fact that I'm the son of two architects, perhaps that might have been something relatively familiar as I was growing up. Design and architecture were things that surrounded my entire life. But also, I found remnants of industrial spaces surrounding nearby my house. I do remember an old structure built for the Pan American Games in 1991, left unused, and that was 3 blocks away from my house. And it became the excuse for me to practice, for me to make my first photograph. But now, looking at these images 20 years down the road, when I was saving them, I was scanning all of this and put them together and organizing them, putting them on folder. Now I do so with a different perspective, with a different narrative, and you're able to sense things that perhaps back then you were absolutely overlooking or absolutely ignoring. So this work gives an impulse to this work, Pending Memories, starting in 2017. And specifically, an image that I found, which triggered a whole set of ideas behind it, and you'll see it shortly. And I can tell you a little bit more about that image in particular. But this was more or less the aesthetic universe of my early years as an art student. I totally forgot about this for many years. I went on to do all different types of things in sculpture and photography, leaving behind this. And I never thought this body of work, which nowadays I call archive series, because they were literally my archive. I never thought it was going to be part of the material for me to have in my most recent show at the Contemporary Art Center in Cuba, nor from my most recent book, Pending Memories, which was just released late December with Turner Publisher in Madrid.
It's interesting to see all these images of your early work, because even if you were not aware or you didn't remember the details of this series when you start working on the Pending series and the Pending Memories series, this is somehow in your subconscious. And I see how ruins, industrial abandoned spaces, and these sort of also geometric compositions of architectural elements were already affecting somehow your interest in reality.
I think so too.
Your connection with that.
I think so too. Inevitably, somehow there has always been a sensibility towards these elements. But I was mentioning before, being inspired by a particular image, and it was this image. This is from the Parrandas de Remedios, which is a festivity in the central province of Santa Clara. It's a Christmas Eve festivity where two factions of the same town compete against each other symbolically, creating this massive facade, like a cathedral-like facade with light works. And this happened on opposite ends on the main square in the town. When I saw this image, and I had attended this event for 3 or 4 years in a row. When I saw this image, I said, you know what? I would attend only. I would go there. I would drive it there only to photograph the back of this structure, which is amazing, the scale of it. But the down part would be that I would only have 2 images per year. And that was, from there on, I started like, you know what? But what if I could build my own structure and I could install that in any location or a scenario I would see fit? And that's what triggered. From there on, I started, putting together basically a team that would see the creation of this images from Pending Memory series with the same challenge that I saw behind it, because technically it was a big challenge. It is a challenging work to produce, and not everybody's up to that challenge. So for me, it was more about putting together the team that that was enthusiastic enough to build those virtual structures. And I guess I was lucky finding that.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you. Is this the first project in which you do this kind of, you have this like sort of team, or you do this sort of collaborative work? Because in this series, you have, the work of architects or designers. There are people involved. So how you see collaboration, how that experience has been for you?
It is the first work that I engage in its creation with so many people. Because up until now, I had always worked in a more private way, where I was able to control every step of the way. And there are advantages but there are also limitations to that kind of workflow. I guess one of the most of the richest experience producing this work was at some point with the making of each and every image in this series, sitting down, the whole team together, printing the work, putting all one next to the other in a big table, and start talking critically about the photograph, about its production. And that discussion led, to new solutions. Things we had partially achieved in the previous one, now were improved for the next one. And that's why this series did not move forward in a linear way, but there were many images that I had to do twice or 3 times or more, because the more we did, the more we got to produce, the better the whole team was getting in the production of it. In every stage it evolves. So there were some images that had to be rendered 3 times, but it was that conversation. The architect, the designer, the engineer, obviously I'm involved there. And there's always, for me, there has always been a small and intimate circle of friends and colleagues. With every new project, with every new series, that I'm always hesitant, that I always have a considerable amount of doubt, like how effective is this that I'm doing? How well is that this set of ideas that I have in mind, how well are they going through in these images, in this work? So I always have a fair amount of doubt when I'm creating a new series. So I rely on this network, this close network of friends, to contrast the result with them. Hey, what do you think about this? Looking at them from a distance, looking at them without giving them too much explanation. What do you get from this? And all of that feedback helps me to solve things, to feel more secure about the work, or certainly to change things if I need to. But definitely this kind of work nowadays, for me, it has expanded the footprint of my work. How do I build a photographic image nowadays, which is in a world plagued by images, by the fragment of a second, we see hundreds of images, millions are coming out like that. So I would say it's among the most challenging medias that require for you to think thoroughly what you're going to do with it, and I guess that reaching towards these other professionals, making this combination of things that I can get out of the camera that do actually exist, but further than that, proposing my own perception of an alternative reality as an artist, that's a dialogue that I'm very much interested to conduct with the audience. And I honestly do feel this is still I'm only scratching the surface here. It's a workflow that I'm pushing forward even more, at the same time that I'm exploring more ideas in the installation and the sculpture work.
You're reading my mind, because I was about to ask you about the sculptures that you have in the studio. This series that is now the title is like Incomplete Monument, and I'm again obsessed with the idea of the past and the present and the future and how they relate to each other, because somehow these incomplete monuments, since the title, are also dealing with that sort of temporal dislocation. So I wanted to ask you about this series, how they connect with the photos, how there's a relation between these works.
Okay, let me go here. Well, pretty fast. I wanted to go. We can go through. These are some of the drawings that commences from the Pending Memory series. Now you can see the drawings, some of the approaches for the possible structures behind it. all of these are the initial conceptions of it. Then shooting locations. Now, this is where the whole engineering continues. These are not great images. These are just literally screenshots of the schematics.
Wow.
That's kind of the process. So going to the idea of the sculpture, this is the most recent, and I can actually go back and show some of the oldest. But this is the most serious. The working title, it's A Sketch for a Monument. And each of them individually, it's volume 1, 2, 3, and so on. These are about 30 inches high, curtain steel. And this is now my most recent work, which connects also with the current project that I'm developing in photography, which the same volume that you see here. When I create this, there's a point that it's going to go to the sculpture and it's going to go to the photography. So to create a whole environment, you know, and I guess the dialogue, both things provide different ways. The sculpture, you don't have a context from where to judge these pieces. They are by themselves. There's a geometry to them. And you can ground certain influences because of its geometry, because of its aesthetic. And I think that's a dialogue that goes through. But other than that, you don't have a context from where to locate this. Now, the photograph, it's not that the photograph illustrates an explanation for the sculpture, but rather it expands in the idea of its possible existence in the real world, in certain architectural scale. So right now I'm alternating when I know that I have a couple of photographs underway that I'm going through the whole process that we have talked before. Now I can concentrate in the production of the sculptures, which is a word that that has been difficult for me to delegate. These I do personally, the cutting, the assembly, welding, and so on. And it's more time consuming. But within a relatively short time, I was able to produce 7 pieces. I do believe I only have 6 of them here. So these 3 of these are the ones that I brought and are currently on view in the space of the Chasama, the Cuban Artist Fund studio. And I based my residency exhibition in the dialogue between the sculpture and the photography.
So the sculptures, they look a little bit different to the structures that we see in the photographies.
Mm-hmm.
The photographies, we've seen this more of sort of scaffoldings and the back of some things that we don't know what they really are, and the sculptures have more this sort of a bulky or solid aspect.
Yeah, this definitely goes now to the 3-dimensional realm. I've left behind the previous work of Pending Memories already. I'm expanding on the influences. I'm expanding on inspiration that I've gotten from that series already. And the sculpture, it's a first step into this new work process that will probably roll out in the next year or so. I usually work on an overlap projects over extended periods of time. I don't photograph every day. I can take a couple of weeks scouting for locations and photographing. With the materials that I'm going to get from those 2-3 weeks, I'm going to continue working the next year. So I have a pretty much premeditated workflow that allows me to explore with time enough in advance where am I gonna go with my work, either in the three-dimensional installation and photography media.
I see. Interesting. So yeah, so some of these are already in the studio. Are you still receiving visitors in the studio?
Yeah, definitely.
By appointment?
It's by appointment. You know, more than happy if anybody wants to stop by. Most of the time I'm there. Although these pieces are done and are shown there, I'm exploring new ideas and had my camera and working with a few stuff there. But other than that, anybody can stop by.
That's great. It's good to know and to let the participants know, because it's always better to see the works in person. That encounter, it's something.
Yeah, for me, it's always very challenging to resume a sculpture in a photograph. It's extremely challenging.
Yeah, especially these structures that in any angle something different is happening. So
yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. Okay. And I wanted to go back for a second and show you. I think it was this one. Hold on a minute. Let me stop this for a second. Because this was the work that came before in a sculpture and installation, and perhaps can give you. I just didn't land myself into that kind of. Okay, hold on. Let me share the screen again. Can you see there?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the work that came before in a sculpture. This came in advance. So this is, by the time I was doing the Pending Memory series, I was also alternating with this work. And here, perhaps the depth with Russian constructivism is even stronger.
Yeah.
Somehow more intentional. You know, for me has not only that it's aesthetically something that I guess I'm wired towards it, but trying to replicate the paradigm, from seeing from art, what the early avant-garde movement stood for, and its relation to social changes movement in early 20th century. Trying to replicate this in 21st century Cuba, where this is, you can try to replicate the paradigm, but it's unfinished, it's rusted, it's more deteriorated. You can see through the inner structure. It's not done. For me, they relate to the condition, to the precarious condition of contemporary Cuban society in a way. So, it was something drawn from art history, but also in close contact with my context. I never lose that of my side. I don't subscribe my work either to exist exclusively in that context, but nevertheless, the inspiration is always there. This was a sequence also called Monument to the Incomplete Man, and I did 3-4 of them, which gave then space to larger installation in public spaces as this one. This was over 6 meter high for the Havana Biennial of 2019, I think.
Yeah. So for this time you built this large scale project.
Yeah.
This event.
This is a much bigger project. It was assembly almost like a Lego of different blocks arriving, each of them.
And here with this structure, it happens that you really don't know what's the front, what's the back, if you're looking at it from which angle, and that sort of uncertainty
Absolutely.
is still there.
Absolutely. As a sculptor, I'm somehow wired to find three-dimensional interest in the shape and its creation.
That's great. And I found it very interesting, this idea that it's part of some of your series, where you're always looking from the back of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, I would like to talk a little bit more about that later when you finish with this project.
Yeah, this was also an exhibition now on interiors, and I was envisioning like a storage, a warehouse where they kept the old propaganda billboards, but now all those billboards are worn out and their structure has collapsed in this some sort of. It reminds me of a bonfire somehow.
Yeah, it's the idea of being surrounded by ruins, and not only the mental ruin of living in a society that it's completely a ruin already, but the actual physical ruins that are surrounding all the time the Cubans. It's already like part of our culture, even if it's not understood like that. When people look at Cuba from away, they think about Cuban culture, they don't think about ruins. But I think this is something that it's already part of our basic elements of our culture.
Yeah, sadly it is. Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Oh wow, that's also a large scale project.
Yeah, I was scouting. These were among the first project that I was kind of scouting the relation between photography and installation within the same show, and the possible, how fruitful could that conversation go. This was a show I did in 2019 in Beverly, Massachusetts, which gave me that possibility to scout those ideas ahead of the show that I did later for the Contemporary Art Center in Cuba. But yeah.
Interesting. So I want to retake that idea of the fact or the concept of looking at the back of things, and ask you about another series of your work, this series of the threshold of uncertainty, like ¿cómo es que lo decimos en español?
El umbral de la incertidumbre.
El umbral de la incertidumbre, exactamente. So you focus on a very different type of element there, but still, this is actually an earlier series before the Pending Memories series.
Yep.
And it was already that idea of looking from the back, or trying to get to the essence of things in a way. So I wanted to ask you about that, and if you can show us some images also of that word.
Yes, I'm pulling them out right now. Hold on. Yes. The decision. Hold on. Let me share the screen. It is a work that definitely influences the Pending Memory series. So that series was divided. This is my website, and that series was divided in these two bodies of work, where I was using religious iconography. It's worth the while to say that I'm not a religious person, but I've been surrounded by this my life. My family is from a religious Catholic background. So I guess the familiarity with these icons was, brought in by part of my family, especially I do remember my grandmother. But I guess I always had that relation of, above all things, curiosity. How is people able to make that connection, to make that bridge through these objects, through these icons, and link that to faith? I guess I've always been surprised by that relation. So when I finally put my hands on several of these items, the position photographing them from behind, oddly enough, for me, it empowered a much more symbolic reading towards them, as perhaps that is constantly attempted to be represented, which is faith. I guess it goes beyond any possible representation. So I'm leaving that towards that you don't see, towards the black part towards the black background. That also inspires the name. So this, all of this first sequence evolves like that. All of this collection is photographed from behind. And then when we finally get to see them up front, as I wanted to create now a position of contrast within the same project, now we find ourselves, let me go here, looking at them as if I were photographing a person with the extreme magnified shots that expose the artifice behind all of these human expressions, the material, the painting, the wood, the crack of it, the glass eyes, and so on. These are photographed with extreme qualities. So you can see them from behind, recognize the full shape, but the closer you get, the more details you're seeing. I kind of enjoyed that. I kind of experienced it. It gives the photograph time to live with the audience.
Yeah, that's interesting because there's an exploration that it has to do also with materiality and yep. the visual aspects of things that in most of the cases, these objects, these religious objects are also showing the passing of time. They are also showing some sort of destruction or elements that are missing parts of their faces, or we already see that these are very like old objects, or they have a lot of use. That's in a way also connects with the idea of the ruins that you explore also later in your work.
Mm-hmm. So oddly enough, yes, this work inspired what came later, which is the Pending Memory series, in an entirely different visual universe. However, the decision was found here in this previous body of work. Usually, up until now, I've had a changing aesthetic from one project to the other, and usually every project somehow has a unique look. So and I figure out that by the time I'm already immersed in it. It's not that I approach every project with a specific way of doing. No. I usually, if I need to go outdoors and I need to make documentary photography to engage with that project, I'll do that. If for the next one I need to head towards the studio and working in environments artificially controlled with lightings and work with objects and so on, I can do that too. If it's more coherent to develop that project in a sculpture or an installation, I can go there. I don't have a particular way of doing. But I think one of the driving forces for me for every new project is that new outcome. You know, how will I solve this new set of ideas and this new set of questions that I may have? And there's always a process. A moment of uncertainty, like, you know, I don't know how am I going to do this, but along the way you start figuring things out. Okay, so I'm going to do this way, and I start practicing. So that's why I usually overlap over longer periods of time before I finally make my decision. Okay, now that I've tried this is going to be the aesthetic that I'm going to continue to develop for this project. And that's what happened, you know, when I just finished this series, The Threshold of Uncertainty, I was already scouting and making sketches for for the next pending memory series, which was absolutely different from a visual point of view, but was influenced by this previous project. There was a question that I believe, because I mentioned that my work at some point provided more questions than it provided answers.
Yeah, and there's a question about it.
Uh-huh.
Do asking questions play a role in the process for your art?
Do asking questions play I don't know. Okay. I guess it's part of the life of the work. I believe in a work of art that expands on a multiplicity of meanings, on a multiplicity of concerns. I'm an individual and I have a history and I have, a set of circumstances that hopefully some of them can come through the work. But above all things, I believe the work itself in a certain way becomes autonomous once it's out there. It's going to talk to you in a way, in a unique way, not the exact same way that I'm going to say it. So I believe on expanding in that idea. I reject the kind of artwork that you have to read a whole statement from the artist in order to get the certain meaning out of it. I like a work of art that connects visually with the audience, and the more you see, the deeper you go into the possible meanings of the work. Since, and I'm referring to the Pending Memory series, when I look at those images, I am constantly, concerned with many questions about the possible existence of this structure, its purpose, what's on the other side, what's the image, what that silhouette of the structure, what can it suggest me? So that's why I say it provides more questions than answers. And ultimately, I'm not interested in the kind of art that provides answers, neither providing solutions. By the contrary, what I enjoy is the conversation that it can develop with the audience. That's a question that I'm constantly asking myself when I'm creating a work. How am I looking at it? The things that I am intending to communicate, but ultimately, and this is at the same time kind of a futile question, how will this talk to the audience? I can speculate certain ideas, but most of it I'll ignore, of course, because it's impossible to control. Nevertheless, it's an interesting exercise to put yourself not in the position of the artist, but in the position of people that's going to read your work without knowing you, without knowing your history, nor the context you come from. So this expands the range of possibilities. Yeah.
Yes, and I think we all, while reading your work and looking at your work, have also a lot of questions in our minds that are, and what we leave when we leave the studio, or when we leave the computer, and after looking at the images of your work, those questions continue to vibrate in our minds, and that's really important. And I think I have a last question to conclude our conversation. And I ask the participants, while we are talking about these last questions, if you have more questions, please write it on the chat so we can address that in a few minutes. But my last question is about photography. So you worked a lot on sculpture, you have a lot of interest in architecture, but it seems that your biggest love is photography. Tell us about that approach of photography. When does that happen? How that has, in a way, become the most important, in a way, expression of your work?
Yes, I guess even since I started the Art Academy, I went to photography naturally, despite of being a media that it wasn't taught in the academic studies program, nor even later down the road at the Superior Institute of Art in the University in Havana. But very early, I created my own darkroom. I started learning things by myself and asking and reaching as many people that knew a little bit about it, being in Cuba. Ironically, though, my official profile throughout 9 years of study between the academy and university was the sculpture, though. But I always did photography. There was a point that my work and my career was exclusively perceived as that of a photographer, and anybody that knew my work would see, hey, Adrián Fernández, yes, he's a photographer. And I've never had a problem with that, although that I never saw myself as a photographer. I was working in photography because I thought it was coherent with what I wanted to do. I liked the media. I felt good in it. I loved its production time. There's a beauty to it. I love the technicality of it as well. But I've never been immersed in I've never been considered myself a photographer. And since 2018, I decided, going back with, not only that I decided that, but I guess that I thought that I had something to say in a sculpture. So slowly, I started putting together the first sculptures that I started to come out in 2018, but it was something that I was already having sketches and models since 2016, but at a very slow pace without no rush whatsoever. The traditional photographer will probably hate me because I absolutely don't care about photography. I love it and I don't care about it. So I can manipulate a photographic image to whatever extent I need to in order to achieve a final result. I can alternate in analog process, in digital process. I can use this and that camera, whatever, just to in order to build a final work. That's my goal. Other than that, the media, I absolutely don't care. I'm very much aware about the history, though. You cannot be an ignorant when you address media. You have to be aware of the technical aspects of it, of its history, of artists that have used it as a media. I'm very much aware about that, from photography and sculpture. But I guess both for me are tools that I'm now using that I think are coherent with what I'm trying to say, in a somewhat coherent language. So right now I'm still exploring how's that relation, how's that moving from one media to the next one, and where it can lead me towards the future. I'm at that point in my career.
I see. That's interesting. It's good to talk about photography, about how do you feel as an artist with dealing with all these different expressions of art and your processes. I have enjoyed a lot this conversation and unpacking with you, or trying to unpack some of the layers of your works, that it's really interesting, and there are so many concepts between lines that can be read, and so many steps of the processes that it's really fascinating. If the participants have any last question, this is the moment. You can write it in the chat.
I hope you have enjoyed it.
So there's a question. Your photos are creating landscapes with structures that are not real. What are your thoughts around real reality versus a created reality, against a created reality?
The reason that what are your thoughts around real reality?
That's a very difficult question.
I can, addressing, there could be very deep connotations to that questions. From an artistic perspective, I feel like I can manipulate reality in whatever need I feel I have to try to convey that message with the audience. All the Pending Memory series proposes, it's in a way, it's always deceiving the audience, because if I don't explain you, if I don't talk about the process, you might actually think, hey, it's there, where it might have been, because I've never seen a photograph of this before. But even myself, I kind of struggle when I'm explaining that kind of work, because I want to tease them for a while. I don't want to explain that fast, so they know right away that, yeah, this is computer generated. The relation, it's hesitating. Is it real or not? It's for you to make, to go through those questions. And I guess that as an artist, I'm in need of creating this alternative reality, when the one that I'm living and the one that I'm in is finding my inspiration is in such a tremendous crisis, So I guess that leads me toward thinking on other possible realities, where there are things that I, as an individual, have inherited, that there are things that have affected me as an individual. And I guess now, looking at the landscape as that place where you store things that you have left behind, I see those structures in a way, it's part of me, it's part of the things that shape me as an individual, part of the past, part of the place that I came from. I'm not fully understanding them, even they are there, even they are still standing, So I'm going to be in the studio still for some time more. So if you want to visit, or you can give you the contact on my cell phone, I'll be more than happy. I'm usually not every day, but I'm going quite often. So I'll be more than happy to be there if any of you wants to stop by.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Betsy and Sparkly Sila, for your questions. And thank you to Residency Unlimited for this opportunity of having this conversation about your practice. Thank you, Adrián, for all these conversation. It's been really interesting for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, and
thank you, everyone.
It was fun.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you both for this great conversation. I just dropped my email address. If you want to arrange a visit, you can reach out to me, and I will connect you with Adrián for sure. You'll be here until the end of May, right?
Yes, I'll be here.
All right, perfect. And if you want to learn more about RU programs, please feel free to sign in our mailing list. And thank you very much. That was great.
All right, Mariam.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Meyken.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.